Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. The past few weeks have been a marathon for international diplomacy. The United Nations General Assembly in New York, then the G20 summit in Rome, the COP26 summit in Glasgow. World leaders are meeting to discuss the urgent issues facing humanity. Guess who's missing? Who has been missing from all of these meetings? Chinese President Xi Jinping. He's taken work from home too seriously, it seems. He doesn't want to leave. For almost 2 years now, the Chinese president has not left his country, triggering questions and speculation. Is he unwell? Is he caught up in some domestic crisis? Or is he hiding from the questions of the world? Tonight on Gravitas, we'll discuss how Xi Jinping went from being a globalization icon. Show day 2 of the COP26 summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India has just concluded his speech. We'll bring you the highlights from Glasgow. Yet another terror attack in Kabul, this time on a military. This is according to data from the National Crime Records Bureau. And Japan is shocked by the Joker's attack on a train to Tokyo on Halloween. We'll get to the inside story. We begin.
Together, we're committing to collectively reduce our methane by 30% by 2030.
US President Joe Biden and EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen announced a new methane deal at COP26, which aims to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Co-founder Bill Gates on the sidelines of the UN conference on climate change in Glasgow. The meeting took place after Prime Minister Modi launched the Initiative for the Resilient Island States for developing infrastructure of small island nations. China has urged citizens to stock up on daily necessities and directed authorities to take steps to ensure adequate food supplies as the country adopts increasingly tight measures to contain its latest COVID-19 outbreak. Meanwhile, the global death toll due to COVID-19 has surpassed 5 million since the disease first emerged. India is on the verge of making a giant leap in defense engineering, with the second phase sea trials of India's indigenous aircraft carrier INS Vikrant underway. The 40,000-ton carrier is expected to join India's navy by August 2022. Sudanese anti-coup protesters manned barricades in the capital city of Khartoum a day after a deadly crackdown on mass rallies. Sudanese banks in the capital Khartoum were also closed as part of the civil disobedience campaign. Drug control police in Costa Rica seized more than 2,500 packages of cocaine in a container at the coastal city of Limon. Authorities said the probable destination was Europe. Official statement: each package was said to contain 1 kilogram of cocaine. Ukraine's defense ministry did not observe an increase in forces or weaponry. Recent reports said Russia is once again massing troops and military equipment on its border with Ukraine after a major buildup this spring. The death toll has risen to 7 in the Nigeria building collapse tragedy, even as rescue workers pulled out 2 more survivors from the rubble of the 21-story building. Scores of workers are still trapped under the debris. South Africa have boosted their semi-final hopes at the T20 World Cup with a 6-wicket win over Bangladesh in Abu Dhabi, with Kagiso Rabada and Anrik Nortje sharing 6 wickets between them. South Africa then chased down the target in 13.5 overs for their 3rd win from 4 matches so far. Tottenham Hotspur have officially appointed Spirito Santo, winner of 5 league titles with Juventus, Chelsea and Inter Milan. Conte has signed an initial contract until June 2023 and becomes one of the league's highest paid coaches. His first assignment will be on Thursday.
For how long can you stay at home? 1 month? 3 months? 6 months? An entire year maybe? How about 654 days? Can you stay at home for almost 2 years? Most of us would reach a breaking point if we remain locked up for that long. China for 654 days now, 1 year, 9 months and 15 days to be exact. China has gone back to work, but not its president. He still prefers to work from home. The United Nations met in September. Xi Jinping wasn't there. The G20 summit happened last weekend. Xi Jinping joined on video call. The COP26 summit is on in. Why doesn't the Chinese president want to leave Beijing? Is there a health scare? Is someone challenging his grip on power? Is he embarrassed to face the world? These questions are being asked, and for good reason. You see, before the pandemic, Xi Jinping had built up a facade. He had positioned himself as but that's what he tried to do. But the Wuhan virus has destroyed all of that. It has killed his being a globalization icon to an international pariah. We'll start with $1 billion, and that's the most obvious excuse, also an excuse that nobody is buying. Now, the thing about truth is that it finds a way to come out. Even the great Chinese, it suggests that all is not well in Beijing. It says the Communist Party is dealing with these officials, according to this report, are quote-unquote preoccupied with protecting Xi Jinping's health. What does that mean? Does it mean that the president is not keeping well? Well, the report does not specify, and we cannot independently verify. But if that's the case, if his health is a concern, Xi Jinping is in for some tough times ahead. His position as president could be challenged, and that's problem number 2, internal party politics and a lot of it. Next year, you see, is critical for Xi Jinping. He wants to extend his tenure as president for 5 more years. Remember, he got rid of term limits for Chinese presidents. So now he can have as many terms as he wants, but he will still need a seal of approval. And that is going to happen next year, if all goes well for him. This month, there is an important meeting, a summit of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. That's the top decision-making body of China's ruling party. They're expected to discuss a resolution that will cement Xi Jinping's authority and legacy further. So far, so good. But China's domestic troubles could derail this celebration. And a lot of his plan reporting fresh cases. The real estate sector is imploding. We've been reporting on this. So far, at least 5 developers have defaulted. They have missed payments worth billions of dollars. The debt bomb in China is exploding, one default at a time. Plus, China faces an energy crunch. Amid power outages, petrol price inwards. And for the Chinese president, that's the only option at the moment to him. And Xi Jinping wants nothing less than that. The Chinese president wants the red carpet to be rolled out. He wants to address parliaments. He once told an American newspaper. These are people who organized Xi Jinping's visits in the past. Well, he'll have to lower them now. The world no longer trusts China. Survey after survey proves that people around the world view China unfavorably. They view Beijing as the aggressor in conflicts. They label the Communist Party as the enemy. So traveling outside China will only invite more trouble for Xi Jinping. He'll be greeted with protests. He's going to face tough questions from his counterparts about the origins of the pandemic, the human rights abuses in Xinjiang, the crackdown in Hong Kong, the military tensions with India and Taiwan. All of it is going to be brought up. And a lot of these problems are not new. But in the past, China was able to buy the silence of the world. It waives its checkbook, and it gets rid of difficult questions. Well, that may not happen anymore. The Chinese economy is no longer an engine of global growth. It is tanking. Economists say China is going through stagflation. That's stagnation plus inflation, stagflation. It means economic growth in China has stagnated or slowed, unemployment is growing, and inflation is rising. So his position as a leader is weakening. He might be able to hold on to power. The question is, For how long? Felt in Glasgow. The COP26 climate summit is going as per plan. It has entered its second day. What happened on the first one? Well, quite a lot. World leaders turned up, dramatic. Their actions, the exact opposite. Take Joe Biden, for example. He was caught taking a quick nap, enjoying a good shut-eye as the opening speeches began. Moments later, he walked onto the podium to declare, there's no more time.
This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes.
Indeed it is, which is why it requires a collective effort. But some leaders who arrived in Glasgow were not even able to participate in the proceedings on day one. It was inaccessible to people in wheelchairs. Here's what happened. The organizers refused to let the minister's vehicle enter the compound. They insisted that she take their shuttle instead. But the shuttle was not wheelchair accessible. The organizer put us away. And from there, she tweeted. She condemned the conduct of the organizers. She said, and I'm quoting, I came to COP26 to meet with my counterparts from around the world. It is sad that the UN, which promotes accessibility for people with disabilities, does not provide accessibility to its events. That's a fair point, we say. How will the UN take care of the future, the climate and global warming when it can't even take care of its delegates, the ones who've arrived for its conference? This is a question that many in Israel are asking. Or to promote the brand of the British monarchy. Because the royal family's involvement in this year's summit is a bit too much. The Queen is not in Glasgow, but she has sent her family. They're rubbing shoulders with world leaders, preaching climate action. Their own record is not so glorious, though. We'll discuss that in a bit. First, look at these images. They're from Monday night. An evening reception was held at the Kelvin Grove Museum. World leaders arrived in a double-decker bus. The royals came in their luxury cars. They had a fancy dinner, they relished some good wine, and then they huddled together to hear a message, a video message from the Queen. What did she say? She briefed world leaders about their duties towards the planet.
Books yet to be printed will describe you as the leaders who did not pass rations. That you left this conference as a community of nations with a determination, a desire and a plan to address the impact of climate change, and to recognize that the time for words has now moved to the time for action.
The time for words has moved to time for action. Wise words, but take them with a pinch of salt, and I'll tell you why. The royal family has 810 tons every year. Now, for the sake of perspective, the average Brit has an annual carbon footprint, part of the problem, not the solution. Plus, last year, the Queen was accused of lobbying to exempt herself from climate laws. So much for their climate activism. The royals should restrict themselves, perhaps, to bringing glamour to such events. Their hypocrisy is being called out. Royals who pollute and preach, and world leaders who land in 400 private jets to talk climate action. This is not lost on the world. Protesters gathered outside the venue of this evening gala. They held banners that read, "We are watching you."
95%. How did you make it today? Nice.
The next morning, these protesters were joined by their star campaigner, Greta Thunberg. She attended a demonstration outside the COP venue. She accused world leaders of pretending to take people's future seriously, and then she was filmed singing. I can't describe.
You can shove your climate crisis. You can shove your climate crisis. You can shove your climate crisis. You can shove your climate crisis.
A productive thing to say. It's truly inspiring. I'm sure this will compel everyone to take the climate crisis seriously. Then we have a group of athletes, Andy Murray, Hannah Bill, Melissa Wilson and Max Whitlock, among others. They've all released a joint video statement to tell politicians that they need to show real ambition and courage to secure the future.
Dear leaders of the world,
this summer at the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games,
we as athletes
prepare
to go faster, higher, stronger.
together. under immense pressure and adversity.
We delivered. Now is your chance.
Determined by each of the participants in it.
At COP26,
the Olympics of climate summits,
we need you to lead us.
To show real ambition and courage.
Working together to secure the future that we all depend on.
Anything less won't win this race.
They're right, it won't. So instead of predicting catastrophes and issuing doomsday warnings, what world leaders need to do is make commitments, real, concrete commitments. India has made one. It has pledged net zero by 2070, meaning that India will become a carbon neutral country by the year 2070. It will balance carbon emissions with carbon absorption. That's net zero. So effectively, you don't add any greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. India has pledged to do this, to achieve this by 2070. This was the highlight of the 5 commitments made by Prime Minister Modi.
Climate change पर इस वैश्विक मंथन के बीच मैं भारत की ओर से इस चुनौती से निपटने के लिए 5 अमृत तत्व रखना चाहता हूं, पंचामृत की सौगात देना चाहता हूं। पहला, भारत 2030 तक अपनी नॉन फोसिल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 500 गीगावाट तक पहुंचाएगा। दूसरा, भारत 2030 तक अपनी 50% एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से पूरी करेगा। तीसरा, भारत अब से लेकर 2030 तक के कुल प्रोजेक्टेड कार्बन एमिशन में 1 बिलियन टन की कमी करेगा। चौथा, 2030 तक भारत अपनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% से भी कम करेगा। 2070 तक भारत net zero ka.
Practical commitment. India has resisted the 2050 net zero goal pressure set by rich countries. Instead, it has taken its capabilities and challenges into account to set a real achievable target. As for those in the West questioning this target, here's a reminder to them about the broken promises of the developed world. The promise to contribute $100 billion as climate finance by 2020. Last we checked, they had delayed this target to 2023. And today, like we said, is day 2 of the COP26 summit. The focus is on the International Solar Alliance, an alliance that will be used to transfer and share solar power between member states. And leading this initiative is India with a unique slogan, One Sun, One World, One Grid. Speaking at the launch of this initiative, Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid out his vision.
One Sun, One World, One Grid. इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस और यूके के ग्रीन ग्रिड इनिशिएटिव के पहल से एक उपलब्ध है और मौसम पर भी निर्भर है। वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड इसी चुनौती का हल है। एक वर्ल्ड हर समय मिल पाएगी, इससे स्टोरेज की आवश्यकता भी कम होगी और सोलर प्रोजेक्ट्स की वायबिलिटी भी बढ़ेगी। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड और ग्रीन ग्रिड इनिशिएटिव के सामंजस्य से एक संयुक्त और सुदृढ़ वैश्विक ग्रिड का विकास हो पाएगा। मैं आज ये भी जानकारी देना चाहता हूं कि हमारे स्पेस एजेंसी इसरो विश्व को एक सोलर कैलकुलेटर एप्लीकेशन देने जा रही है। इस कैलकुलेटर से सैटेलाइट डेटा के आधार पर विश्व की किसी भी जगह की सोलर पावर पोटेंशियल मापी जा सकेगी। यह एप्लीकेशन सोलर प्रोजेक्ट्स का लोकेशन वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड को भी मजबूती मिलेगी।
The West And its broken promises is what we were discussing earlier. They also promised to save Afghanistan, but look at what's happening there now. Almost every day, the country witnesses a terrorist attack. Today, a suicide bomber targeted a military hospital in Kabul. At least 19 people died, more than 50 were wounded. Near the entrance of the hospital, 2 explosions were heard. Then there were sounds of gunfire. Reports say a group of terrorists broke into the hospital grounds and opened fire. Our correspondent in Kabul, Anas Malik, arrived at the scene moments after the bombs went off. He sent us this dispatch earlier in the day.
There's been an explosion behind the road's been entirely cordoned off. It's been cleared. What we've heard are 2 explosions to this very road. There are unconfirmed reports that there can possibly be an attack. But what we've heard from the local media is that there was a suicide explosion or an apparent suicide explosion. And now when we got here, we heard 2 explosions, one of them being very loud. You can see those fumes of smoke, that thick clouds, smoke clouds coming out from the Sardar Dawood Khan.
No terrorist group has taken responsibility for this attack so far, but the Taliban are blaming the Islamic State Khorasan. Yesterday we told you how this terrorist group, the ISIS-K, is ramping up its recruitments. Former members of the Afghan forces are joining the ISIS-K. Since late August, this group has killed almost 350 civilians in Afghanistan. 350. Today's attack proves how dangerous Afghanistan has become. We received some pictures of the aftermath of this attack. These could be disturbing visuals for some of our viewers. We advise viewer discretion as you look at this story. This is a photo from inside the hospital. These images are from inside the hospital. This is a children's ward. There is blood on the floor and bodies on stretchers. Apparently, the terrorists went. A team captured the Taliban in action. They were securing the streets, but they looked clueless. They were struggling to contain the violence. Incidents of 52 attacks in Afghanistan. More than 500 Afghans have lost their lives. The dead bodies are piling. It was filled with bodies, human bodies. The Taliban say that these are did they die. The Afghan security forces had only one enemy until recently, and that was the Taliban. But the new rulers of Afghanistan are blaming the previous government for this.
At a 400-bed military hospital in Kabul, there's a big container which is full of bodies of soldiers. The past government didn't even have the courtesy to look after the relatives and hand over the bodies to them. Now, Islamic Emirate is trying its best to locate the families to whom these bodies belong and then hand over these bodies to them. Unfortunately, we have not as yet been able to find them.
Fasiuddin, the army chief of the Taliban, he is one of the many commanders who launched an offensive to take power. Now the same men have been tasked with securing Afghanistan. The result is there for the world to see: more terrorist attacks, more violence, and innocent Afghans who continue to pay the price for the mistakes of the West. Even the backers of the Taliban are struggling to get their act together. I'm talking about China. We come back to China. China is with Shanghai detected one new case of the Wuhan virus. One case. Do you know what they did? They locked up 34,000 visitors at Disneyland. 34,000. Everyone was forced to take a test because one person had tested positive there. What did the mass testing achieve? Nothing. No new cases were found. You see, even if more people were infected by that one person, they wouldn't have tested positive immediately. We know this about the virus after 2 years. So what was this stunt for? Our next report tells you how China is stumbling in its fight against the Wuhan virus.
They were supposed to be enjoying these fireworks. But for these 34,000 people, a trip to Disneyland turned into a nightmare. One visitor in Shanghai tested positive for the Wuhan virus, and Chinese officials locked down the entire theme park, complete with 34,000 people inside it. The visitors tried to leave, but they couldn't. The exits were closed. The rail lines were shut. Their ordeal continued into the night. All visitors were forced to take a Wuhan virus test. They couldn't leave until they tested negative. Guess how many new cases were found? 0. No one tested positive after it out to be futile. Why did the Chinese authorities order mass testing? There are no clear answers. The Chinese media is reporting conflicting accounts. They are not sure if that one patient even traveled to Disneyland or not. Even if she did and came in contact with others, they wouldn't have exercise all about. Local officials are still panicking. Later in the night, 200 buses were called in to take the visitors home. They have been asked to stay in self-isolation for 2 days. Another 100,000 people who visited Disneyland over the weekend will also be tested. The Delta variant is spreading fast across China. So far, around 500 people have tested positive. Again, these are the numbers China has chosen to share, hard to verify. New cases have been found in 16 provinces. Inner Mongolia and Heilongjiang are the hotspots this time. Despite administering more than 2 billion shots, China has not been able to get rid of the virus detected. Entire colonies are locked down. Travel is restricted, and borders are closed. Despite these tough measures, China is unable to prevent new outbreaks. The citizens are now fed up. Some have even protested against this zero-COVID policy. The lockdown at Disneyland only validates their concerns. It was unnecessary. But Beijing has once again, the Chinese citizens are paying the price for the draconian yet ineffective measures of the Communist Party. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Our next story is about a friendship on the rocks. It involves two friends who until recently seemed inseparable. They're now viewing each other with suspicion. The friends I'm talking about are Sri Lanka and China. For the last 1 decade, their friendship has blossomed. The ties have been cemented, but now cracks are emerging. Colombo and Beijing are fighting over something unusual: organic fertilizers. It's a very interesting story. Listen to this. In April this year, Sri Lanka banned chemical fertilizers. It switched to organic fertilizers and it decided to produce them at home, domestically, no imports. Their foreign reserves were dwindling. And this decision, not importing fertilizers, was expected to save the government around $400 million. But Sri Lankan farmers did not like the plan. They resisted the switch. They cited the lack of expertise and time, so Colombo relented. They would import fertilizers, they said, but only the organic variety, no chemicals. And for this, they turned to China, to a Chinese fertilizer company called Qingdao Seawind Biotech. This company was to import 96,000 metric tons of organic fertilizer into Sri Lanka at the cost of $42 million. This was in September. But Colombo rejected it. Why? Because it was contaminated with bacteria. Sri Lanka's National Plant Quarantine Services tested a sample from this consignment brought by a Chinese ship. They found it to be contaminated with harmful bacteria called Erwinia. It's an innocuous sounding name, but it causes plant ship, the Chinese fertilizer consignment. And that's not all. Sri Lanka also halted the deal, the entire $42 million deal with China. How did China respond? Like it always does. Beijing blacklisted a top state-owned bank in Sri Lanka. It cited a vicious letter of credit default for the fertilizer deal. And this is the People's Bank of Sri Lanka we're talking about. It has been blacklisted for failing to pay the Chinese company. Officials on both sides are clashing over who's at fault. The Chinese embassy in Colombo tried defending its country rather creatively. They tweeted. They tried to explain the chronology of events according to China. And the tone of the tweet made it sound more like a threat. You can look it up. And when you do, look for another story. The ship that carried the contaminated fertilizer to Sri Lanka has now changed its name and returned. I'm not making this up. I'm not kidding. On the 22nd of September, the ship arrived in Sri Lanka with a consignment. At that time, its name was Hippo Spirit. That's what the ship was called, the Chinese ship. Then on 14th October, after Sri Lanka had blocked that ship, it sailed to Singapore, from where it was expected to go back to China, but here the ship deactivated its automatic identification system. This is a system which basically helps you track a vessel's movement. All ships have it, but this Chinese ship, it deactivated it. It went out of range. Then on the 24th of October, the same ship was spotted again at the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. This time it came with another name. It was called Seio Explorer. So how do we know it's the same ship? Because it carries the same identification number. You see, this number remains unchanged. You can change the name of a ship, you can change its flag, its owner, but this identification number will remain the same. So it's easy to spot that ship. So now you know what the Chinese tried to do. They tried to trick the Lankans. They were exposed. It's remarkable the extent to which China can go to get its order accepted, to get its contaminated, bacteria-ridden order accepted. What's worse, it's doing this to a country like Sri Lanka, a country that considers China its most important ally, at least one of the most important ones. This sort of duplicity should be yet another wake-up call for Colombo. It needs to realize that China cannot be trusted, not with loans, not with development projects, not even with fertilizers. We now move to a Halloween story. What were you doing on Sunday, the 31st of October? The world was celebrating Halloween. Streets were decorated with pumpkins. There were parties at clubs and homes. People were going all out with their Halloween costumes and gothic makeup. Children around the world were serving trick-or-treats. Thanks to marketing in Hollywood, it's now apparently an international festival, Halloween. So while everyone was having a blast trying to ward off ghosts, horror came to life in Japan. A train was attacked by a joker. He went around stabbing passengers with a knife before setting the train on fire. And this happened for real. And it happened in Tokyo. It was around 8 p.m. local time. A train was returning from the western suburb of Shibuya. Almost everyone on the train was returning from Halloween parties. They were all dressed up in spooky costumes. In walks a joker. He's carrying a knife with artificial blood stains and a plastic bottle which is filled with lighter fluid, the liquid that you use in lighters. Once the doors are sealed and the train begins moving, the joker goes rogue. He starts stabbing people. He sprays lighter liquid around the carriage. Before you know it, the joker has set the car on fire. Imagine the scene playing out. It's a Halloween nightmare coming to life. One witness thought that this was all a Halloween stunt, but soon there were people getting injured, there were flames, there was smoke everywhere. People were panicking, praying. Someone brought the train to an emergency stop, but its doors were still closed. How could passengers hide from the killer joker? Some managed to jump out of the window, some fainted. Take a look, it took 30 minutes to put out the fire. 17 people were injured. As the commotion ended, the joker was found sitting alone on a train seat. He was smoking a cigarette. Look at him, as if he's marveling at the success of his attack. Here's what happened next. The police entered the train. The joker, his name is Hattori, was arrested. And this was just the beginning of the story. A series of interesting conversations followed. The joker was asked by a lot of people. Next question, why? Because things were not going well with work and friends, so he wanted to kill people and get the death sentence. You look surprised, I'm not. Full disclosure, by now I'm getting used to such weird stories coming out of Japan. Not too long ago, we told you about Japan's elderly who shoplift just so that they're spoken to. Just so that they can have some human interaction, they go shoplifting. Japan sometimes is like a Freudian Pandora's box. You never know what comes out of it. It's a classic case for those looking to research on human psychology and the different ways in which our human minds act out. Anyway, that's a story for another day. Let's get back to the joker. He was identified as a 24-year-old. The name is Kyota Hattori. He said he quit his job in the month of June. He moved from one city to another, all the while meticulously planning an attack. He bought a knife online. He picked up 4 liters of lighter fluid. And then he headed for Tokyo. He reached the city in October. By then, the city was gearing up for Halloween. So Hattori picked Halloween as his D-Day. On Sunday, while the world was getting ready for Halloween parties, this man left his hotel dressed as a Joker. He took a train to the Shibuya district. The area is famous for its Halloween street parties. On reaching Shibuya, Hattori got on a train that was heading back to Tokyo. And you know what happened next, what he did on the train. So why did he choose to dress up as a Joker? He said he adored the character of Joker in the Batman series. Now, those of you who watched the movie will remember that it had a very similar scene. It's a 2019 movie, Joker. Joaquin Phoenix attacks men on a train after being harassed by them. The scene marks Phoenix's transformation as a Joker. And Hattori is a Joker fan, but he says his inspiration for this particular attack was not just the movie. It was also an incident in August. A man in Tokyo stabbed 10 passengers on a commuter train. This was around the time of the Olympics. Hattori wanted to replicate this. He wanted to stage a horror on wheels. And trains, as you might be aware, are the most popular mode of transport in Japan. They've also proved to be a popular site for attacks. Some involved the sarin gas attack. It was in 1995, a cult called Aum Shinrikyo. 15 people died, more than 6,000 were injured. Also, what happened in Tokyo was not the only horror incident on Halloween this time. In the US, there were at least 11 attacks across 7 states. 12 people died, more than 52 injured. This Halloween was scary for real. Perhaps it mirrored the year gone by. You know, the Wuhan virus and everything else that followed? People lost their jobs, many lost family or the will to live. This Joker, for example, he said nothing was going well for him, so he wanted to die. Killing lots of people was his way of securing death. It's twisted. And this is how the human mind sometimes acts out in times of distress. Some slip into depression, some go rogue. Japan, like I mentioned, is a classic case for studying human psychology. In 2020, when the Wuhan virus struck Japan, a record number of people committed suicide. And then there are people like Hattori who try to goodness, I'm afraid, is not over on the show tonight. We now turn to India. A new report shows that in 2020, India lost more people to suicide than the Wuhan virus. Let me rephrase this. More Indians died of suicide than of the Wuhan virus in 2020. This is according to NC of India. This is what it says. In 2020, some 140,000 people died of the Wuhan virus in India. The same year, more than 150,000 people died of suicide in India. 150,000. That's the highest number of suicides in a decade in this country. How did this happen? Why did this happen? What prompted so many people to take their lives? The NCRB data has some details. It points at family problems. It was apparently the major driver for suicide in India in 2020. More than 51,000 people are said to have committed suicide because of family problems. More than 40,000 people took their lives because of illness. More than 9,000 because of related issues. Nearly 7,000 because of love affairs. More than 5,000 because of bankruptcy. India's daily wage workers made up the largest share of total suicides. More than 37,000 daily wage workers took their lives in 2020 in India. They accounted for 1/4 of the country's total suicide. The pandemic forced a lot of people out of jobs. They lost their livelihoods, exhausted their savings. Many were driven to suicide. So here's a thought. Can these deaths also be called Wuhan virus homicides? I'm not a fan of alternative facts, but we're talking about 37,000 daily wage workers who could have been alive had the virus from China not arrived in India. So again, can these deaths also be called Wuhan virus homicides? Give it a thought. Now, housewives make up for the second largest share of people who died from suicide in India. At least 22,000 of them killed themselves last year. 22,000 housewives. Of the total 150,000 plus suicides, the cause for 16,000 is not clear. 15,000 have been put in the category of other causes. This data has come at a time when the world is being spooked by a suicide documentary from India. The data here tries to answer as many questions as possible. It says more men kill themselves compared to women. Men account for 71% of the suicides. There were also 22 transgenders, 45,000 women. Here's how the data looks when categorized based on profession. 37,000 daily wage workers, 22,000 housewives or homemakers, 17,000 self-employed people, 15,000 unemployed, nearly 14,000 salaried persons, and over 12,000 students. And let's not forget, 2020 was a year of uncertainty for students too. They were out of their classrooms, locked inside their home, away from friends. Many in India did not have access to online learning. There was uncertainty over national competitive exams. Correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I can remember, at least 14 students took their lives over NEET in 2020. In 2020, many students also wanted this exam to be cancelled. They said the Wuhan virus pandemic did not allow them to prepare for it. 31 children died by suicide every day in the last year. Perhaps a lot of these deaths could have been avoided had the virus from China not come to India. 2020 saw several Indian celebrities also die of suicide. You might remember some of these cases. You know, unlike Japan, where suicides are often reported, in India, suicides are stigmatized. They're treated with silence. At one point, they were even criminalized. It was only in 2017 that India decriminalized attempts to suicide. That's when India passed the Mental Health Care Act. What did it change? It did change some things, but the change was not enough. Unlike in the West, where most suicides are the result of mental illness, in India, a lot of these are said to be impulsive. A way out of a broken marriage or poverty or exam stress. Mental illness accounts for only a portion of the suicide. What does it tell you? If India is to address suicide, it must dig deeper, destigmatize mental health. That'll be a good start. India must also lift the taboo associated with a broken marriage, for instance. India must accept that it's okay to fall out of love. Destigmatize divorce. Let students breathe. Rethink perhaps the system of education and examination. Make families more inclusive, become open to difficult conversations, be it about drug abuse or same-sex marriages. Till date, most Indians don't really talk about feeling suicidal. Well, those who do are clubbed as quote-unquote psychos. Parents don't want to admit that their children may be suicidal. I'm sure it's difficult for them. Families want to rule suicides as death by accident. Suicide survivors are judged and shamed. These cases can be prevented if we begin talking about them. It's that simple. A Brown University research shows that engaging in suicide-related conversation can significantly reduce the risk of suicide. You see, suicides can be prevented. And for that, we need political, social, and emotional will. Think about it. We're wrapping the show with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.